A forbidden forest holds the last memory of a vanished world. Elara, a young historian, walks into the whispering woods, knowing she might never return. Her colleagues called it professional suicide, a quick path to being just another name on the long list of those consumed by the woods. But Elara carries a different kind of map, one drawn from forbidden texts and whispered legends, all pointing to a single incredible truth. Somewhere in that tangled, silent expanse lies the proof of the Sunken City, a civilization that disappeared so completely it was erased from history itself. By the end of this journey, you will discover how forests can become living libraries, preserving the echoes of entire cultures long after they are gone. What secrets would a tree keep if it witnessed the fall of a great city? And what happens when a curious mind is brave enough to listen? The world vanished in an instant. One moment, Elara's fingers were tracing the rough, gnarled bark of an ancient tree, and the next, she was somewhere else entirely. The silent forest was gone, replaced by the vibrant chaos of a sun-drenched marketplace. The air was thick with the scent of spices and baking bread, filled with the laughter of merchants and the cries of children. She saw people in robes of brilliant white and saffron, their faces clear and alive, bartering for goods that had turned to dust 1,000 years ago. The vision was not a picture, it was an experience, a memory so potent it flooded every one of her senses at once. Then, as suddenly as it came, it shattered. The silence of the woods crashed back, leaving her dizzy and gasping, her hand still pressed against the cold, unfeeling bark. This was not a legend. It was real. The forest was not just a place, it was a record, and she had just read its first sentence. A cold dread coiled in her stomach, wrestling with a fierce, electrifying joy. Had she truly touched the past, or was her mind, strained by isolation and fear, finally breaking? To retreat now would be to choose sanity, to return to a world where this was impossible. To go forward was to accept that the trees were watching, that the very air was thick with ghosts. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum in the oppressive quiet. Then, with a resolve that felt both foolish and necessary, she took her knife. She carved a single, small line into the tree's trunk, a mark of proof for a world that would never believe her, and a promise to herself that she would not turn back. The forest seemed to acknowledge her decision. The shadows between the trees began to shift, not with the wind, for there was none, but with a slow, deliberate purpose. From deep within the woods, a low, melodic hum began to resonate, a sound that felt both alien and deeply familiar. It was not a threat, not yet, but an invitation, or perhaps a test. The hum grew steadily louder, a siren's call woven from memory and magic. Pushing her doubt down, Elara moved toward it, her steps guided by the sound. She pushed through a final wall of ferns and entered a clearing where the air itself seemed to warp and shimmer, charged with an unseen energy that raised the hairs on her arms. The grove was a sanctuary of fused wood and emerald light. Before her, ancient trees had woven themselves into a perfect circle, their trunks merging into a single, pulsing archway that hummed with the same low melody that had drawn her here. The air tasted of ozone and damp earth, and the soft green glow seemed to breathe in time with her own quickening pulse. Drawn by an instinct she could not name, Elara stepped forward and pressed her palm flat against the cool, smooth bark of the central tree. The world did not just shift this time, it shattered into 1,000 pieces. A tidal wave of sound and sensation crashed over her, not a single memory, but a chorus of them, a desperate symphony of a world ending. She heard a scholar's frantic voice. "We are losing the songs. The stories are fading from the stone," followed by a child's fearful whisper, asking why the grown-ups were crying. A mother hummed a lullaby that dissolved into static, and a leader's voice boomed with fading power, urging calm in the face of a terror no one could see. They called it the Great Forgetting, a magical decay that unraveled their very existence from the fabric of history, leaving not ruins, but emptiness. The chorus was not just information, it was emotion, a profound collective sorrow that settled deep into her bones. These were not artifacts, they were people, and their story was now a weight upon her soul, a burden she had not asked for but could not abandon. Her training screamed at her to remain detached, to observe and record without bias, but her heart had been broken open. How could she be objective about a child's lost lullaby, about an entire culture's final, fading breath? The conflict was a cold knot in her stomach. She had to bring something back, something tangible that could carry even a fraction of this truth. Her eyes fell to the grove floor, where a single leaf, not of chlorophyll, but of what looked like solidified light, had fallen. It was crystalline, cool to the touch, and within its facets she could see the faint, swirling colors of residual memory. She knelt, her movements reverent, and carefully lifted the glowing leaf, placing it within a padded fold of her pack. The moment it left the soil, the grove's light flickered. The gentle hum stuttered into silence, and the air grew cold. From the woven archway of trees, a figure began to coalesce, pulling itself from the very bark and vine. It was a guardian, a being of ancient wood and sharp thorns, with eyes that held the deep, patient cold of the earth itself. It did not move, only watched her, its silent judgment more terrifying than any roar. For a long, breathless moment, Elara was certain she had made a fatal mistake. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, the spirit raised a limb of tangled vine. It did not point back the way she had come, but toward a dark opening between two massive roots, a path that led down into the absolute blackness beneath the earth. The choice was a physical pressure in her chest. To follow was to trust a being that clearly saw her as a thief. To refuse was to turn her back on the very heart of the mystery. The lost voices still echoed in her mind, their story now a part of her own. Stepping forward, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, she entered the root-choked passage and began her descent into the deep, dark below. The root tunnels closed in around her, a breathing labyrinth of wood and shadow. Elara moved with painstaking care, her boots whispering against a floor woven from thick, coiling roots. The only light came from the crystalline leaf in her palm, casting shifting blue patterns that made the walls seem to writhe. Every surface was covered in fine, hair-like tendrils that hummed with a low energy, and she took care not to step on them, feeling instinctively that they were fragile nerves in a vast, living brain. As she progressed, her eyes adjusted to the gloom, and she began to see the carvings. They were not etched with tools, but grown into the very wood, intricate scenes depicting a thriving city of graceful spires and canals, people tending luminous gardens and gathering in sun-drenched plazas. It was the Sunken City, not in its final moments, but in its vibrant prime. Overcome by a need to understand, she reached out, her fingertips barely grazing a scene of a family sharing a meal. The emotional echo hit her not as a vision, but as a pure, unfiltered feeling. A wave of domestic joy, of simple contentment, washed over her, so potent it brought tears to her eyes. Then, just as quickly, it was replaced by a piercing sorrow, the memory of loss from the very people enjoying that long-lost moment. She snatched her hand back, breathing heavily. She was not just an observer, she was a participant in their ghostly lives, and the weight of their collective happiness and grief was staggering. The walls themselves seemed to press closer, the tunnel narrowing until the rough bark brushed her shoulders. A cold sweat broke out on her skin as claustrophobia clawed at her mind. The fear was a physical presence, whispering that she would be trapped here, her bones added to the root-wrapped earth. She could have taken a knife to the carvings, pried a piece of this history loose as proof, but the thought felt like a violation. These were not artifacts to be collected. They were final testament to be honored. She made a choice, then and there. She would not take. She would remember. Closing her eyes, she committed the scenes to memory, tracing the lines with her mind instead of her hands, becoming a witness rather than a collector. As her resolve solidified, a subtle shift occurred. The oppressive pressure in the tunnel eased, the walls retreating just enough to let her breathe. The forest was testing her, and she had passed, but the relief was short-lived. From the darkness ahead, a low rumble echoed, a sound of stone grinding against stone. It grew steadily, resolving not into a threat, but into a deep, rhythmic pulse, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The sound pulled her forward, a siren song, leading her out of the cramped passage and into the mouth of a vast, subterranean chamber. Its cavernous expanse was filled with an eerie, blue luminescence that seemed to emanate from the very air. The cavern took her breath away. Its vast ceiling was a tapestry of glowing moss and crystalline roots that cast a soft, blue luminescence over a still, black pool stretching into the gloom. Elara approached the water's edge, her own reflection refusing to form. Instead, the surface shimmered with visions of the Sunken City in its golden age, a breathtaking panorama of gleaming towers and tranquil gardens, a world alive with color and movement. Compelled by a force beyond curiosity, she knelt and dipped her fingers into the cool, dark water. The moment she touched it, the visions vanished. The liquid surface hardened, coalescing into a bridge of solidified light that spanned the pool, leading directly to a small, rocky island at its center. Her heart pounded as she stepped onto the glowing path, each footfall feeling impossibly solid. There, upon a simple stone pedestal, rested the artifact. It was no larger than her fist, shaped like a teardrop seed, and it pulsed with a gentle, inner light. The legends called it the Heart Seed, the vessel of an entire civilization's knowledge, dreams, and memories, now dormant and waiting. The conflict within her was immediate and fierce. To take it would be to give the outside world a truth it had forgotten, to restore a chapter torn from history itself. But to remove it would be a theft, a violation of the sacred trust this forest had upheld for centuries. She made her choice, whispering a promise into the silent air. She would not claim it, only bear witness, to learn what she could without disturbing its rest. But as she stepped closer to the pedestal, the air around her chilled. Translucent figures materialized from the cavern's mist, forming a silent, impassable circle around the island. They were the last guardians, their forms woven from memory and resolve, their faces etched with a sorrow that spoke of ultimate sacrifice. Their silent presence was a wall of pure intention. Taking the heart seed would not just be theft, it would shatter an ancient pact, a magic woven to protect these memories from a world that had already proven it could not be trusted with them. Her actions would not save this history, they would erase it forever, unraveling the delicate threads that held it all together. She stood frozen, the weight of her decision crushing her. One of the guardians then stepped forward, its form shimmering like heat haze. It slowly extended a hand, not in aggression, but as if in offering. Its eyes held a complex, haunting mixture of stern warning and a profound, aching invitation. The spectral figure did not speak with words, but with a flood of images that bloomed directly in Elara's mind. She saw the Sunken City in its final days, not under attack by armies, but fading from within. The great forgetting was a silent tide, washing away names, then faces, then the very stones of their homes. In a final, desperate act of preservation, their greatest minds had not fought the magic, but had woven their own into the land itself. They chose to become the forest, to trade their physical forms for a collective, living memory. The heart seed was not a treasure to be found, but the very core of that spell, the anchor holding their entire shared consciousness in a state between life and death. To remove it would not be an act of discovery, it would be an execution, snuffing out the last, fragile spark of a people who had sacrificed everything just to be remembered. The figure's name came to her on a wave of profound sorrow, Lyra, one of the first who had chosen to become a guardian for all eternity. Elara's quest for glory crumbled into dust under the weight of this truth. Her desire for acclaim, for a place in the history books, felt petty and violent in the face of such a sacred trust. The forest itself seemed to watch her, every rustle a judgment, every whisper a question. Could she be the one who finally brought the true oblivion these people had fought so hard to escape? Her hands, which had trembled with the desire to touch the artifact, now fell still at her sides. She looked from the glowing heartseed to Lyra's sorrowful gaze and made her choice. "I will not take it," she vowed, the words feeling small but sincere in the vast cavern. "I came for knowledge, but not at the cost of a soul. Let me be your scribe instead. Let me carry your story to the world, not as a stolen relic, but as a warning and a wonder." As a token, she slowly drew her own worn journal from her pack, holding it out. "These are my memories, my thoughts. I offer them as a sign of my word." Lyra's form shifted, the stern warning in her eyes softening into a fragile, tentative acceptance. A thin, glowing tendril of mist extended from her hand, touching the journal's cover, and for a moment, Elara felt a strange sense of connection, as if her own life was being briefly scanned and understood. The pact was sealed, but Lyra's projected thoughts turned sharp with new urgency. "Your presence is a ripple in a still pond," she imparted. "Others feel it. They are drawn not by curiosity, but by greed, by a hunger for power they do not understand. They seek to consume this place, and your trail has led them to our threshold." The warning hung in the air, a silent alarm. Then, as if Lyra's fear had summoned it, a new sound echoed down from the root tunnel, distant but unmistakable. It was the brutal, repetitive chop of metal hacking at living wood. The brutal sound of chopping became a thunderous crack as a section of the root wall splintered inward. A dozen figures poured into the cavern, their movements sharp and efficient, their faces hidden behind masks of polished wood and dark cloth. At their head was a man whose presence was void of cold purpose, his eyes scanning the chamber and locking instantly onto the heartseed's gentle glow. Kale did not see the guardians, the shimmering figures of memory that moved to intercept him. He saw only a prize, an object to be claimed. His crew carried not shovels, but cruel, silver tools that hummed with a parasitic energy, devices designed to sever magic from its source. They ignored the spectral guardians, their forms passing through them like mist, their focus absolute. Without a thought for her own safety, Elara moved, placing her own fragile body between Kale and the stone pedestal. "You cannot take this," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "It is not an artifact, it is a soul. This entire forest is alive with their memory." Kale's laugh was a short, ugly sound that echoed in the sacred space. Sentimentality from a scholar, he sneered, not even breaking his stride. History is just treasure that has not yet been priced. "Stand aside, or you will be priced too." He raised a gloved hand, and one of his crew leveled a strange, pronged device at her. But Elara did not yield. She knew weapons were useless here. The true power was in the story. She turned her back on Kale, a gesture of ultimate defiance, and pressed her palms flat against the cool, living stone of the chamber wall. She closed her eyes, not in prayer, but in remembrance. She did not ask for help, she offered proof. She channeled every memory she had absorbed, every echo of joy and sorrow, every lullaby and final breath. She poured the entire lost symphony of the Sunken City back into the forest that remembered it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the cavern awoke. The very roots that formed the floor and walls uncoiled like serpents, whipping through the air to wrap around the legs and arms of Kale's crew, pulling them down with the immense, patient strength of the earth itself. They shouted in shock, their tools clattering to the ground, but Kale was faster and far more ruthless. As a root lashed toward him, he swung one of his silver tools, and a crackle of energy severed the living wood instantly. He lunged past the struggling forms of his men, his eyes burning with avarice. Elara turned, but she was too slow. His gloved hand closed around the heartseed and wrenched it from its pedestal. The moment it left the stone, the world broke. The cavern trembled with a violence that was not physical, but existential. The blue luminescence flickered and died, plunging them into near darkness. The visions on the water's surface shattered into static. A deafening roar, like 1,000 voices screaming in unison, and then being silenced all at once, filled the air. The heartseed's gentle pulse in Kale's hand became a frantic, erratic strobe, and the very memories held within it began to fray and destabilize, threatening to vanish into nothingness. With a triumphant, reckless shout, Kale turned and fled back into the broken tunnel, the stolen soul of a civilization clutched in his fist. Without hesitation, Elara sprinted after him, the remaining guardians flowing alongside her like a river of pale light, their silent forms the only guide in the sudden, consuming dark. The chase was a frantic blur through a living maze of collapsing memory. Kale and his hunters fled down the root-choked tunnel, but the path itself was now their enemy. The walls bled light, projecting shimmering, chaotic visions of the Sunken City's final days. A market square dissolving into mist, a child's face melting into static. Kale saw only traps, illusions meant to confuse him. He barked orders, swinging his silver tool at a phantom crowd, his greed blinding him to the truth. His men followed him straight into a solid wall of knotted wood that had not been there a moment before, their shouts of frustration echoing behind them. Elara moved differently. She did not fight the shifting corridors. She flowed with them, her mind open to the sorrowful echoes. A vision of a crumbling bridge was not a block, but a sign to leap to the left. The ghostly sound of a forgotten lullaby pulled her down a side passage that shimmered into existence just for her. The forest was speaking to her, guiding its scribe, and with every step, she felt its pain more acutely. High above, through gaps in the root ceiling, she could see patches of the canopy graying and dying, leaves turning to dust as the heartseed's stabilizing presence faded. Each withering branch felt like a part of her own soul dying. The guardians swarmed around the trapped hunters, their misty forms solidifying into barriers of thorn and vine, containing the immediate threat. But Kale had broken through, his singular obsession carrying him deeper. Elara made a split-second decision. She sent a silent plea to the spectral forms, a request to hold the line here. Then she turned and ran after Kale alone, trusting the bond she had forged to light her way. The tunnel ahead was a nightmare of blended time. She had to dodge a phantom cart that felt solid as stone and leap over a chasm that was both a memory of a collapsed street and a very real, physical drop. The very air stung with the dissonance of a world unraveling. She finally cornered him in a grove that was a monument to grief. The trees here wept rivers of thick, golden sap that smelled of incense and loss. The air was heavy, almost too thick to breathe, vibrating with the faint, broken melody of that same lullaby, now stretched and distorted. Kale stood panting in the center, the heartseed clutched in his hand, its light flickering wildly like a dying heartbeat. He turned to face her, his eyes wide not with triumph, but with a dawning, terrified understanding. The stolen memories were not a power to be wielded. They were a death rattle, and he was holding the source. Kale's scream tore through the grove as he tried to force his will upon the heartseed. He demanded visions of treasure, of vaults filled with gold and power, but the artifact recoiled violently. A searing wave of energy shot back up his arm, a feedback of pure sorrow that felt like holding a dying star. He stumbled back, his face a mask of agony and rage, the seed's light now burning his gloved hand. Elara did not run at him. She stepped forward slowly, her hands open and empty. "Take my maps," she said, her voice cutting cleanly through his pained gasps. "Every path, every hidden grove I have charted, they will lead you to more treasure than you can imagine. Just give me the seed. It is worthless to you, and it is killing this place." For a terrible moment, she saw the calculation in his eyes, the greed warring with the pain. Then, with a furious roar of frustration, he did not hand it to her. He hurled the heartseed like a cursed thing. It arced through the heavy air and struck the trunk of the great weeping willow at the grove's center, tumbling down to land amidst its thick, exposed roots. The moment it touched the earth, the tree reacted. The roots shifted like waking serpents, curling around the glowing seed and beginning to draw it down, pulling it back into the safety of the deep, dark soil. Elara's breath caught. The forest was reclaiming its heart, burying it beyond any reach. She had to act now, not with force, but with truth. She threw herself to her knees before the willow, ignoring Kale as he barked orders to his dazed crew. She placed her palms flat against the rough bark of its trunk, not to take, but to give. She closed her eyes and poured every memory out. She showed the willow the scholar's frantic voice, the child's whisper, the mother's lullaby. She shared the vibrant joy of the marketplace and the profound peace of their sun-drenched plazas. She offered her own awe, her sorrow, her promise to be their scribe. It was not a plea, but a presentation of evidence, a proof of her sincerity, written in the only language the tree would understand. The willow's weeping sap flowed thicker, its branches trembling. It hesitated, the roots pausing their slow, consuming work. The heartseed was half submerged, its light pulsing in a slow, questioning rhythm. That hesitation was all the opening Kale's crew needed. Regrouped and armed with heavy axes, they advanced. The first hunter swung his blade at a thick, low-hanging branch. The sound of steel biting into living wood was a sacrilege. Without a weapon, Elara did the only thing she could. She shifted her body, placing herself directly between the next swing and the willow's trunk, shielding the tree with her own back. She braced for the impact, her eyes locked on the fading seed, but the impact never came. The willow's grief turned to fury. Its long, trailing branches, which moments before had drooped with sorrow, now surged upward like whips. They wrapped around the axe wielders, yanking them off their feet, disarming them in a tangle of living rope. The grove became a whirlwind of defensive motion. Yet Kale, ever agile, ducked and weaved through the thrashing limbs. His eyes were not on the tree anymore, nor on the seed. They were fixed solely on Elara, the source of all his failure. As the willow defended itself, he evaded a grasping branch and made a desperate, final lunge straight for her. The air turned to ice as Kale lunged, his blade a silver flash in the grove's sorrowful light. Elara braced, but a form of shimmering mist and ancient wood moved faster. Lyra flowed between them, her spectral body intercepting the strike meant for Elara's heart. The blade did not clang against metal, but passed through her with a sound like tearing silk. Lyra's form did not cry out. She simply turned her head, her gaze meeting Elara's one last time, filled not with pain, but with a profound and final acceptance. Then she dissolved, her being fractured into 1,000 motes of soft, golden light that drifted down like warm snow, settling over the grove. Where they touched the weeping willow, its bark smoothed and hardened, its trembling branches stilling with renewed resolve. The other guardians, their forms flickering, seemed to draw strength from the falling light, their misty outlines solidifying into sharper, more defined shapes. Lyra had not died. She had returned her essence to the whole, a final sacrifice to protect the memory she was sworn to keep. A wave of crushing guilt washed over Elara, so heavy it stole her breath. Lyra was gone because of her quest, her naive belief that she could simply observe and leave. But the guilt did not paralyze her. It crystallized into something harder, sharper. It forged a resolve as unyielding as the ancient roots beneath her feet. The forest's pain was now her pain, its loss her own personal failure to redeem. She rose, turning to face Kale, and her eyes held a new, terrifying fierceness. He stared, bewildered, at the empty space where Lyra had been, then back at the transformed woman before him. This was no longer the hesitant scholar he had threatened. This was an avenger, a voice for the silent. Ignoring his stunned expression, Elara closed her eyes. She pushed her grief aside and reached for the memory of the root tunnels, for the subtle, harmonic hum that had vibrated through the hair like tendrils. It was a language of resonance, of pure feeling. She did not shout a command. She hummed, a low, steady tone, then a higher, answering pitch, a sequence she had absorbed in the dark, a request for release. The great willow shuddered. Its roots, still coiled protectively around the half-buried heartseed, began to loosen. They unwove themselves with a gentle, rustling sound, lifting the glowing artifact and presenting it, cradled in living wood, directly to Elara. She reached out and took it. The moment her skin made contact, the full, staggering weight of the trust placed in her crashed down. It was not just an object in her hand. It was the collective breath of a civilization, their final hope, their shared soul. She felt the responsibility sear into her very being. Kale saw the transformation in her posture, the absolute connection between woman and seed. His greed, thwarted and furious, overrode his survival instinct. With a raw cry of desperation, he launched himself at her, not with a weapon, but with grasping, empty hands, his intent to tackle her and shatter the seed between them on the hard ground. There was no time to think, only to feel. Elara's will surged, a single, clear directive born of her vow: protect. Instead of raising her hands to defend herself, she pulled the heartseed to her chest and opened her mind completely, merging her consciousness with the swirling memories within. The world did not go black. It exploded into pure, blinding white. A cascade of light erupted from the seed, enveloping the grove, Kale, his crew, and Elara in a torrent of radiant energy. The solid ground vanished from beneath their feet. The grove, the weeping willow, the very air dissolved into a rushing river of luminescence, pulling them all into the swirling heart of the forest itself. The world dissolved into a river of living light, and when it settled, Elara stood at the center of everything. This was the Nexus, the heart of the heart. All around her, the roots of the forest converged into a vast, swirling pool of luminescence, a silent, flowing tapestry woven from every memory the woods had ever held. The air itself was thick with whispers, not of sound, but of pure emotion, the collective wisdom and sorrow of 1,000 lifetimes. Kale and his crew were frozen where they stood, their weapons fallen from limp hands. Their faces, once set with greed, were now slack with awe and a dawning, crushing understanding. They were not witnessing a treasure, they were drowning in the soul of a people, and their petty desires were silenced by the immense weight of it all. Elara felt the heartseed pulse in her hand, a fragile, frantic heartbeat against her palm. The choice was upon her, stark and final. She could keep it. She could carry this glowing soul out of the woods and into the world, a truth so profound it would rewrite history books and make her name legendary. But she knew, with a certainty that went deeper than bone, what would follow. The seed would be studied, dissected, its magic perhaps replicated or drained. It would become a commodity, a prize, and the fragile consciousness within it would be shattered by the noise of a world that had forgotten how to listen. The other path was to let it go, to return the heart to its home. She She looked at the swirling pool of memories, this perfect, protected library of a lost world. To place the seed back into that nexus would be to heal the forest, to restore the dying canopy above, but it would also seal this history away from human hands forever. It would mean her journey, her sacrifice, would leave no physical proof. She would return to her colleagues with nothing but a story they would never believe, her credibility in ruins, her professional life over. The desire for acclaim was a shrill, desperate voice in her mind, but it was drowned out by the gentle, trusting pulse of the seed and the silent, grateful presence of the guardians who now watched her from the edges of the light. She thought of Lyra's final sacrifice, a gift given not for glory, but for preservation. Elara's own story was unimportant. The truth was all that mattered. With a slow, deliberate motion, she knelt at the edge of the luminous pool. She cupped the heartseed in both hands, offering it back to the swirling currents. "I remember you," she whispered, "and I will make sure others remember too." Then she let it go. The teardrop seed fell into the nexus. For a moment it floated, a single point of concentrated light. Then it dissolved. A wave of pure, radiant energy exploded outward, flowing up through every root and vein of the great forest. High above, in the world of sunlight and air, the gray, withered leaves flushed with vibrant green once more. The silent hum of the woods returned, deeper and more peaceful than before. The memories were safe, restored, and permanently woven into a living system that could no longer be stolen, only witnessed. As the brilliant light faded to a soft, enduring glow, a gentle force gathered Kale and his dazed crew. They were lifted and carried away, their minds gently scrubbed of the nexus, the heartseed, and the woman who had bested them. They would wake at the forest edge, confused and harmless, remembering only a failed expedition into an impenetrable wood. For Elara, the guidance was different. A path of softly glowing moss lit before her feet, and the spectral forms of the guardians flanked her, not as guards, but as an honor guard. They led her back through the now quiet root tunnels, up into the familiar gloom of the whispering woods, and finally to the very grove where her journey had begun. The air was clean and still, the oppressive silence replaced by a profound, breathing peace. She stood alone, the forest's chosen scribe, her pack empty of treasure, but her mind and soul overflowing with a story that was now hers to tell. The ancient trees of the grove seemed to lean inward, their branches forming a protective circle around Elara. The remaining guardians, their forms now more light than mist, gathered silently. From the heart of the great willow, a single, luminous seed descended, floating on a beam of soft, golden light until it came to rest in her open palm. It was no larger than an acorn, its surface hard and smooth like polished wood, and it pulsed with a gentle, living warmth. This was the forest's parting gift, a compressed echo of her entire journey, held within a vessel she could carry. She understood instinctively that this seed was a key, not a treasure chest. It would allow her to revisit the lost symphony of the Sunken City within the quiet of her own mind, to hear the lullabies and feel the market's joy again, but only as a private remembrance. The original living library would remain safe, its roots buried deep, and its location forgotten by all but her. A bittersweet ache filled her chest. She had succeeded beyond her wildest hopes, yet she was returning to her world with a story that defied all proof. How could she explain a truth that left no physical trace. Her colleagues would see a woman changed by isolation, her credibility shattered, her career a ruin. But as her fingers closed around the warm seed, the choice became clear. Her purpose was no longer about belief or acclaim. It was about stewardship. She looked into the serene, light-filled eyes of the guardians and made a silent vow. She would use this gift to teach, to show that some histories are not meant to be owned, only honored. By accepting this seed, she had become something new, a living bridge between a silent, remembering world and a noisy, forgetful one. The weight of that role settled on her shoulders, a solemn and perpetual duty. The grove's woven archway of trees began to shift, its trunks groaning softly as they parted to form a sun-dappled path that had not been there moments before. It was a clear, direct route leading away from the Heartwood and back toward the forest's edge. Taking a final, deep breath of the sacred air, Elara turned her back on the grove and stepped onto the path. The seed pulsed rhythmically in her hand, a quiet, constant companion, as she walked toward a world that had no idea it was waiting for a story it had already forgotten. The sunlight felt thin and foreign on her skin as Elara stepped from the tree line. Her clothes were frayed at the seams, and her eyes held a deep, unsettling stillness that had not been there before. She walked with a new purpose, her path taking her not home, but directly to the grand, marble steps of the Royal Historical Society. She ignored the raised eyebrows of her former colleagues, their whispers following her like ghosts, as she bypassed the main halls and requested a private audience with head archivist Valerius. In his quiet, book-lined study, she offered no artifacts, no sketches on parchment. Instead, she placed the small, wooden seed on his desk and told him a story. As she spoke of the Sunken City, the seed pulsed with a soft light, and the air between them shimmered with faint, translucent images of graceful spires and luminous gardens, of people in white robes laughing in a marketplace that had not existed for 1,000 years. Valerius, a man whose life was built on proof and precedent, watched the ghostly echoes of a civilization dance above his inkwell. His face was a battlefield of warring instincts. The rational scholar in him screamed that this was a hallucination, the desperate fantasy of a mind broken by the wilderness. But the historian in his soul, the part that had first fallen in love with lost stories, recognized a profound and heartbreaking truth in the echoes of that forgotten lullaby. He could not accept her evidence, yet he could not deny it. The professional rift between them was instant and painful. He called her account unverifiable, her methods a danger to the society's reputation. She saw the fear in his eyes, the fear of a truth too large for their institutions to hold. It was then she knew her role had changed forever. She would not force her proof upon a world that was not ready to see. Leaving Valeria's study, she made a decision. She would write a manuscript, but not a literal one. It would be an allegory, a coded epic of a lost kingdom and a sacred grove, a story that taught the principles of preservation and the cost of greed without ever revealing a single map or coordinate. She poured the forest's symphony into a new vessel, translating the Heartseed's memories into myth and metaphor. When her manuscript, titled The Song of the Root Keepers, began to circulate, it was met with polarized fascination. Some lauded it as a work of profound philosophical genius, a beautiful parable for their times. Others, however, saw a cipher. They became obsessed, convinced that her flowing prose hid literal directions to a real, undiscovered power. These scholars did not seek understanding. They sought possession, and they began to pick apart her every word, searching for the key to the treasure they believed she had found. Elara found herself in a new kind of vigilance, constantly deflecting their inquiries, guarding the secret with the same ferocity the forest guarded its heart. One quiet evening, as she sat by her window watching the moon rise, the seed on her desk pulsed with a soft, warm rhythm. It was not a warning, but a reminder. A feeling of profound connection washed over her, a sense that the guardians were watching, not with suspicion, but with approval. The woods were not a secret to be kept locked away in her mind, but a home that remembered its scribe. She felt a gentle, unmistakable pull back to the whispering woods, an invitation to return not as an intruder, but as a welcome guest. The dream was not her own. Elara stood once more in the grove of weeping trees, but the golden sap on the bark shimmered with a new, silver light. From this luminous fusion, a guardian coalesced, its form more fluid and familiar than the others. It carried Lyra's patient sorrow, but also a fierce, urgent energy all its own. It did not speak, but opened its hand, and in its palm bloomed a vision of the world, not as a map of nations, but as a tapestry of light. Pinpricks of brilliant green glowed from every continent, each one a nexus, a heartwood, a forest like the whispering woods. One pulsed in a mist-shrouded valley of the Himalayas, another deep within a Patagonian ice field, a third beneath the canopy of a Central African rainforest. Each held the memory of a different vanished people, a unique civilization that had chosen to become the land to escape oblivion. Then, a shadow fell over the vision. A creeping, corrosive blackness, like spilled ink, began to spread from several points, threatening to smother the lights. The message was terrifyingly clear. Her forest was not unique, and it was not safe. The threat was global, systematic. The Whispering Woods had been a single chapter in a much larger story, and the book was now on fire. Waking with a gasp, the weight of the revelation pressed down on her. Her personal quest was over, but a cosmic duty had just begun. How could she return to her quiet study, to writing allegorical manuscripts, when other sacred groves were being hunted? The conflict was immediate and exhausting. In the human world, her notoriety was a cage. Scholars who had once dismissed her now watched her with sharp, hungry eyes, hoping to follow her to a real discovery. Every public appearance, every lecture, felt like walking a tightrope over a chasm of suspicion. She had to move to act, but doing so openly would paint a target not just on her back, but on every memory forest she sought to protect. So she began a new, secret work. By day, she was the reclusive author, politely deflecting questions about her inspirations. By night, she became a different kind of historian, cross-referencing ancient travelogues with geological surveys and indigenous folklore. She searched for patterns, for descriptions of woods that were never silent, of trees that seemed to watch, of places where time itself felt thin. Her research tentatively identified a few possible sites: a labyrinth in Crete, said to be built around a talking tree, a submerged forest in the North Sea, where fishermen told of hearing bells. Each potential location was a fragile hope, and with each one she noted, her fear grew. The shadowy organization hunting these places was not a myth. fragments of intercepted correspondence, whispers from the darkest corners of the academic underworld, spoke of a cabal that called itself the Unwoven. They sought not to understand the past, but to mine it, to extract the raw power of concentrated memory and use it to reshape the present to their will. Her fears were confirmed when a single, untraceable letter arrived. It contained no return address, only a single sentence typed on a plain sheet of paper. Watch the roots. The warning was both cryptic and perfectly clear. They knew she was looking. Her name was on their list. The Unwoven were not just a threat in some distant forest. They were here, in her city, watching her movements. The time for quiet research was over. That night, Elara packed a single bag with far more practical supplies than she had carried on her first naive journey. She placed the warm, wooden seed in an inner pocket, close to her heart. She was no longer just a scribe for a single lost civilization. She was a warden for them all, and her next journey would not be into the heart of one mystery, but into the front lines of a hidden war for the soul of history itself. The first letter was the hardest to write. Elara chose an old colleague, a linguist named Anya, who had once risked her own reputation to defend a controversial theory about oral histories. The message was a web of careful allegory, a story within a story, but its core question was a clear and dangerous one. Do you believe a forest can remember? Anya's reply came not by letter, but in person, arriving at Elara's door with a single, determined nod. One by one, they found others, a botanist who spoke of plant consciousness, a geologist who mapped seismic anomalies that defied explanation, an archivist who specialized in deliberately destroyed records. They were 7 in total, a secret cell of scholars who met for the first time in the high, cold silence of a monastery library, a neutral ground far from prying eyes. They called themselves the Keepers of the Root, and their purpose was not to possess, but to protect. Pooling their knowledge was like assembling a fractured globe. Anya's linguistic analysis of a Mesopotamian epic revealed a stanza describing a grove that hummed with the voices of ancestors. The geologist, Kalon, cross-referenced this with strange energy readings from a remote valley in the Andes. The archivist, Silas, produced a forgotten sailor's log that spoke of a desert oasis, where the sand itself seemed to replay the echoes of caravans long turned to dust. Each clue was a thread, and together they began to weave a terrifying tapestry. The Whispering Woods was not alone. Scattered across the planet were other memory forests, each a unique library, holding the soul of a different lost world. But with this dawning understanding came immediate conflict. Kalon, the geologist, argued for a firm, active hand. If we know a place is threatened, we must intervene directly, he insisted, his voice echoing in the silent library. We can create barriers, disrupt satellite imaging, whatever it takes. Anya, the linguist, countered with a scholar's caution. Our role is to document and observe. If we interfere, we become another external force, another variable that could damage the very ecosystems we seek to preserve. How are we different from the Unwoven if we impose our will? The debate threatened to fracture their fledgling alliance before it truly began. Elara listened to both sides, the warm pulse of the seed against her chest, a constant reminder of her vow. She stood, her voice calm but firm. We will not be gardeners who prune and shape, she declared. "We will be the fence around the garden, acting only when the wall is breached. Our principle is partnership. We do not act for the forests, but with them, and only when their existence is in imminent danger." This core tenet, the Pact of the Root, united them. Their first test came sooner than expected. Sila's intercepted corporate land acquisition, reports targeting a vast, uncharted tract of Boreal forest in Scandinavia. The company's geological surveys were suspiciously focused on areas matching Kalon's anomalous energy signatures. They were not looking for timber. They were hunting for something else. The keepers did not confront the corporation. Instead, they used their collective expertise to weave a trap of misinformation. Anya forged a series of bogus core samples, suggesting the land was geologically unstable. Kalon used his contacts to plant a rumor of a rare, protected lichen that would trigger endless environmental reviews. They created a digital ghost, a paper trail of problems that made the land more trouble than it was worth. The corporate expedition was quietly canceled. Their first victory was bloodless, a perfect, silent operation, but it was not without cost. A week later, a terse, encrypted message found its way to Sila's. The corporation had not simply given up. They had pivoted. They were now hiring, not standard security, but specialists. The message listed titles that chill the blood. Cognitomancers, experts in unraveling thought patterns. Resonance engineers who could map and shatter magical frequencies. They were assembling a team of extractors, a scalpel to cut out the heart of a forest where a bulldozer had failed. The quiet war was over. The keepers now prepared for a loud one, a confrontation that would not be fought in a single grove, but across the hidden, beating heart of the world. The desert air was a dry furnace, and the silence here was different from the whispering woods, a vast emptiness, broken only by the hiss of shifting sand. Guided by fragments of a star chart, etched on camel bone, Elara stood at the edge of a sea of dunes, the warm pulse of the wooden seed a stark contrast to the desolation. This was the place the texts called the Sand-Sung Forest, a civilization that had not built with stone, but had woven its essence into the desert itself, mastering the secret languages of water and wind. She knelt, pressing the seed into the hot sand, and opened her mind. The response was not a chorus of voices, but a single, dry whisper that seemed to come from the stones beneath her feet. The guardians here were not of wood and leaf, but of scouring wind and patient sandstone. They showed her a truth that tightened her chest with dread. The forest was not gone, only dormant, a vast slumbering library buried deep beneath the dunes, waiting for a convergence of rare, celestial rains to awaken and sing its stories for a single night. And a corporate mining operation was drilling a core sample directly toward its dreaming heart. Rallying the local nomadic communities felt like trying to grasp the wind. They were a pragmatic people, their lives dictated by the sun and the scarce water. Their legends spoke of a singing desert, but to them, it was a fireside tale, not a truth to risk their livelihoods over. Elara knew she could not tell them about cognitonancers or memory forests. She had to speak their language. She requested an audience with the tribal elder, a woman named Zara, whose face was a map of sun and wisdom. In the elder's tent, with the scent of mint tea thick in the air, Elara did not offer arguments. Instead, she asked for Zara's hand. When the elder reluctantly offered her palm, Elara placed the wooden seed upon it. She channeled a single, potent memory from the whispering woods, not of a city, but of a deep, subterranean aquifer, a vision of pure, life-giving water flowing through ancient roots. She let Zara feel the water, not as a commodity, but as a sacred, living memory. The elder's eyes widened, not with fear, but with a deep, resonant recognition. The alliance was forged not on the shared goal of saving a myth, but on the mutual, profound respect for the hidden water that sustained all life, a truth her people had always known in their bones. The mining company, sensing resistance, accelerated its schedule. The low rumble of their drills was soon joined by the sharper, more violent sound of explosives. Each detonation, a tremor that threatened to collapse the fragile sandstone caverns housing the dormant forest. They were not just digging, they were blasting, and they were days, perhaps hours, from a collapse that would bury the sand-sunk forest under millions of tons of rock and sand forever. The time for diplomacy was over. Elara, Zara, and a handful of the tribe's most skilled scouts pored over faded hide maps, tracing the paths of seasonal flash floods. Their plan was audacious, a gamble against the desert itself. They would not confront the miners directly. Instead, they would use the land's own fierce power. Working through the night, the nomads used their knowledge of the wadis, the dry riverbeds, to strategically dismantle ancient stone diversion walls and build new, temporary ones from rock and woven brush. They were not creating water, they were redirecting its inevitable, coming path. As the first light of dawn painted the dunes in hues of orange and gold, the mining crew set their final explosive charges at the mouth of the primary drill site. At that exact moment, a low roar echoed from the distant mountains. The seasonal rain, a brief, torrential downpour miles away, had arrived. The diverted flash flood, a churning, brown wall of water and debris, surged through the newly carved channel. It did not destroy the mining equipment, but it surrounded it, transforming the site into an impassable island of mud and rising water, halting all work and forcing a panicked evacuation. As the miners retreated, Elara stood beside Zara on a high ridge, watching the water flow. The desert drank deeply, and far below, she felt a subtle shift, a faint harmonic hum from the deep sand, as the slumbering forest sensed the gift of water and settled into a more secure, deeper sleep. The immediate threat was over, but the victory was local and temporary. The Unwoven would not be fooled again. Their response would not be a clumsy mining operation, but a precise, surgical strike, and Elara knew the next Heartwood would not be so easily defended. The diverted floodwaters swirled around the mining equipment, turning the desert floor into a churning sea of mud. As the last truck retreated, a profound silence returned, broken only by the gentle lapping of water against sand. Then, something impossible happened. Where the water had seeped into the deepest dunes, the sand began to glow. Crystalline structures pushed their way to the surface, unfolding like flowers made of light and glass. They bloomed in a silent, radiant explosion across the landscape, each one humming with a soft, melodic frequency. This was the sand-sung forest, awake for the first time in centuries. From these blooms, guardians emerged, their forms not of wood, but of shimmering, aqueous light, reflecting the sky and the sand. They flowed toward Elara, and though they had no mouths, Their gratitude washed over her in a wave of pure, cool emotion, a feeling of profound relief and connection. Then, as the water receded and the sun climbed higher, the crystalline flowers slowly folded back into the earth, and the guardians dissolved, their memories secure for another long cycle of sleep. The victory was breathtaking, but it was also a beacon. The mining corporation, furious at the loss of their investment, did not see a sacred awakening. They saw environmental sabotage. Within days, international warrants were issued for Elara's arrest, painting her as a dangerous eco-terrorist. Her face was now on bulletins, her name a headline. The network of keepers she had built was immediately tested, its channels buzzing with coded warnings as she vanished into the nomadic communities, learning to move like a shadow across the dunes. In hiding, she found a new purpose. The brief communion with the sand-sung guardians had left her with more than just their thanks. It had left her with echoes of their knowledge, a civilization that had mastered living in harmony with a harsh world. She spent her days in a hidden tent, meticulously documenting their insights into water conservation, sustainable architecture, and desert agriculture, adding a vital new chapter to her growing archive of lost wisdom. But the hunters were adapting. The corporation's extractors, the cognitomancers and resonance engineers, had not been idle. They had analyzed the energy signature of the blooming desert, and they had traced its catalyst back to her. They began tracking the unique magical resonance of the wooden seed she carried, a faint but traceable ripple in the world's unseen energies. Her hiding place was no longer a sanctuary. It was a trap about to be sprung. The chase became a nerve-shredding game of cat and mouse across the vast emptiness, with Elara relying on the nomad's ancient knowledge of the land to stay one step ahead of the high-tech pursuit. Her escape came on the wings of a howling sandstorm, a biblical wall of dust and wind that provided the perfect cover to slip away. As she sheltered in a rocky outcrop, a secure message finally blinked through on her device. The news was from her network, and it was worse than she feared. The Unwoven had located another Heartwood. This one was not in a remote desert or a deep wilderness, but hidden in plain sight, disguised as a simple city park in the middle of a teeming metropolis. The city air tasted of exhaust and damp concrete, a far cry from the clean silence of the desert. Elara stood at the iron gates of Overlook Park, a small, tired patch of green nestled between glass and steel towers. This was the Heartwood, a final, desperate whisper of a civilization that had not built spires, but had grown them, living in perfect symbiosis with the natural world. Now, its ancient song was being drowned out by the city's constant roar. Posing as a university botanist, conducting a study on urban tree health, she gained entry and made her way to the grove. It was a circle of gnarled, silver-barked trees at the park's center, their leaves a dull, dusty green. The moment she stepped between them, a wave of profound weariness washed over her. The guardians here were mere flickers, translucent shapes that wavered like heat haze, their forms too weak to fully manifest. The memories they held were fragmented, glimpsed as static-filled images of a city, woven from living vines and blossoming stone, a stark contrast to the dying reality around them. This urban heartwood was decaying faster than any other, poisoned by the very air and soil it was rooted in. Her cover as a botanist provided the perfect excuse to take samples and document the grove's rapid decline. She found toxic levels of heavy metals in the soil and noted the strange, brittle texture of the bark. The city officials saw a dying eyesore, but Elara saw a library on fire, its pages turning to ash before her eyes. The public notice for the park's redevelopment into a multi-level shopping plaza was already posted. She had to act, but a direct confrontation would expose her. So she weaponized her disguise, using the language of science and local pride to build a shield. She began organizing neighborhood meetings, presenting her botanical findings not as a mystical plea, but as evidence of a unique, irreplaceable ecosystem. She spoke of the grove's rare mycorrhizal networks and its potential historical significance, carefully planting the idea that this was not just a cluster of trees, but a living landmark. The local residents, already weary of the city's relentless development, latched onto her campaign, seeing in the grove a last bastion of their community's character. The developer, a man named Corbin, watched this grassroots movement with cold amusement at first, but when the city council agreed to hear a formal proposal for historical designation, his amusement turned to action. He was no ordinary businessman. His methods were too precise, his knowledge of the grove's strangeness too specific. Elara's network confirmed her fears. Corbin was a front, his funding traced back to the same shadowy accounts used by the extractors. He moved to dismantle her credibility with surgical cruelty. One morning, as Elara arrived at the grove, she was met by city inspectors and 2 uniformed officers. Corbin had filed a formal complaint, presenting forged documents that painted her as a fraudulent academic with a history of inventing data to stop development projects. He had even planted fabricated research notes in her temporary university office. The charge was academic fraud, a lie that threatened not just her mission, but her liberty. The ground felt unsteady beneath her feet. Her carefully constructed cover was crumbling, and with it, the trust of the community she had rallied. The grove itself seemed to feel her despair, its faint guardians flickering in and out of existence like a failing light bulb. Just as the city council prepared for its final vote, a single, encrypted data packet arrived from Silas, the archivist in her network. It was a digital skeleton key, unlocking a trove of hidden financial transfers and encrypted communications between Corbin and a known resonance engineer on the Unwoven's payroll. The evidence was undeniable, a map of corruption that led straight from the planned shopping plaza to the deliberate extraction of the grove's fading magic. The quiet war for the Heartwoods was about to erupt into the harsh light of a city council chamber, and Elara would have to risk everything to turn a vote on a park into a public trial for the soul of history itself. The city council chamber was a battlefield of polished wood and fluorescent lights. Elara stood at the podium, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, the developer Corbin's cold smirk burning into her from the front row. She did not speak of guardians or heart seeds. Instead, she presented aged land surveys showing the grove predated the city itself, and ecological data proving it was a unique, self-sustaining ecosystem. As she spoke, her network executed their plan. Headlines bloomed on smartphones across the room, exposing Corbin's hidden financial ties to a shadowy research firm specializing in anomalous energy extraction. The public gallery, once divided, erupted in angry whispers. The vote was no longer about a park. It was about corruption, and the council, swayed by the overwhelming shift in sentiment, voted to grant the grove permanent protected status. Corbin's face contorted from smugness to pure, unadulterated fury. He had lost in the light of day, so he would act in the cover of night. Later, under a moonless urban sky, the extractors came. They moved with a chilling efficiency, their vehicles silent, their tools humming with that same parasitic energy Elara had seen in the cavern. She was waiting for them, alone, but for the grove's faint, flickering guardians. She had no weapons, no army, only her wits and the warm wooden seed pressed in her palm. As the first extractor raised a device toward the central silver tree, the grove itself fought back. A root twisted upward, tripping the man. A whisper from the leaves seemed to come from behind another, misleading his aim. It was a desperate, subtle defense, like a sick man swatting at flies. It would not be enough. Knowing she had to escalate, Elara closed her eyes and reached for the seed. She poured her own will into it, not to take, but to give a channel, to amplify the faint presence of the guardians into something that could be seen. She asked the grove to show its true age, its immense, patient weight. What rose from the circle of trees was not a single spirit, but an illusion of one, a colossal form woven from shimmering mist and the gathered moonlight, its eyes like ancient stars, and its voice, the sound of 1,000 rustling leaves. It was a phantom, a projection of the grove's collective memory and Elara's desperate need, but to the extractors, it was terrifyingly real. They saw a primordial entity, a god of the wood awakened in the heart of their city. Their high-tech tools fell from nerveless fingers as they stumbled back, tripping over one another in a blind panic to escape. And from apartment windows overlooking the park, cell phone cameras captured it all, the shimmering giant and the fleeing figures. The footage went viral before the extractors' vans had even left the burrow. The world now knew her, not as Elara the scholar, but as the woman who communed with forest spirits. The attention was a double-edged sword. Well-meaning researchers and mystics sought her out, offering aid and alliance. But so too did new, more cautious enemies, who saw the viral video not as a hoax, but as a confirmation of a power they desperately wanted to control. In the weeks that followed, as the protected grove began to show the first signs of recovery, its leaves a fraction greener, a single, heavy envelope arrived at her temporary safe house. It contained no letter, only a sleek, black date to chip, and a handwritten note on impeccable stationery. The note was an invitation to a private audience with Liam Thorne, the reclusive tech billionaire, and it contained only one deeply unsettling sentence. "I have seen the other libraries," it read. "Let me show you what I am building to protect them all." Alistair Vance's estate was a fortress of glass and silence, perched on a cliff above a churning gray sea. Inside, the air was still and cool, the only sound the soft hum of hidden machinery. Vance himself was a man of quiet intensity, his gaze sharp enough to feel like it was peeling back the layers of her thoughts. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He knew about the whispering woods, the sand-sung forest, the dying grove in the city. He knew about the heartseed and the unwoven. He laid it all out with a calm, terrifying precision. His offer was staggering, a blank check of funding, political influence, and legal protection for her entire network of keepers. In return, he asked for one thing, a partnership, a chance to guide the application of the forest's ancient knowledge for what he called the next step in human advancement. He spoke of curing diseases locked in genetic memories, of solving energy crises with forgotten technologies, of uniting a fractured world with the wisdom of the past. It was a vision so grand and so seductive, it made her own mission feel small. Yet the word application made her skin crawl. Was he a visionary or the most sophisticated extractor she had ever met? The debate that tore through her network was fierce and immediate. Kalon, the pragmatic geologist, argued that they were losing their quiet war. "We are outgunned and outnumbered," he insisted over a secure line. His resources could protect a dozen heartwoods at once, something we could never do on our own. We cannot let perfect purity be the enemy of survival. But Anya, the linguist, voiced the fear coiling in Elara's own gut. "He speaks of guidance, but that is just a prettier word for control," she countered. What happens when his idea of human advancement conflicts with the will of the forests themselves? Do we become his wardens, helping him manage the very libraries we swore to leave wild? The division was a crack in their foundation, and Elara felt the weight of the choice, threatening to split them apart. She looked at the weary faces of her comrades, people who had risked everything and knew their strength was finite. Vance's power was not. Her decision was a gamble she hated to make. She agreed to a trial, a single, closely monitored operation. Vance would bankroll the complete protection of a vulnerable heartwood, a swamp forest in the Louisiana bayou that was being poisoned by agricultural runoff. In return, he would be allowed to send a small, joint team of his scientists and her keepers to non-invasively document the forest's ambient memory echoes, its general knowledge of botany and ecosystem balance. There would be no contact with guardians, no quest for a central artifact. Elara would personally oversee every moment, her own wooden, seed-sensitive monitor for any distress from the forest. It was a leash, and she held one end, but she knew Vance held the other, and his grip felt far stronger. The true test came not from the humid bayou, but from a crackling satellite image Vance projected onto his wall. It showed a remote Arctic valley, its glaciers retreating at an alarming rate. Beneath the melting ice, his satellites had detected a unique energy signature, a heartwood preserving the memories of a civilization that had thrived during the last ice age. The melting ice was both revealing it and destroying it, destabilizing the permafrost that had protected it for millennia. A mining consortium, alerted by the same geological shifts, had already filed claims for the rare earth minerals now exposed in the valley. Vance laid out two paths. He could use his immense resources to buy out the mining claims and fund a massive, ongoing geoengineering project to stabilize the glacier, a phenomenally expensive endeavor with no profit. Or he could let the mining proceed, and his team could move in to rapidly extract the forest's memories before the ice fully collapsed. The choice was a perfect mirror of his intentions, a balance between preservation and plunder. As their private jet soared northward into the endless white, Elara watched him. She studied the way he looked out at the vast, frozen landscape, searching for any flicker of calculation in his eyes, any sign that he saw this breathtaking, fragile world not as a sanctuary to be saved, but as a resource to be logged. The Arctic air was a sharp, clean blade in her lungs, and the fate of the first Ice Age civilization to be discovered now rested on the conscience of a man she did not trust. The Arctic wind screamed across the glacier, a sound of pure, elemental fury. Beneath the howl, a softer, more profound rhythm pulsed from a grove of trees encased in crystal ice. Their trunks, frozen solid for millennia, glowed with an internal, sapphire light, each pulse a slow, cold heartbeat from a world long lost. Elara and Vance's team worked against time, erecting geodesic domes of a special polymer designed to reflect sunlight and insulate the ancient ice. The work was brutal, hands numb and breath pluming in the sub-zero air. What stunned Elara was Vance's presence. The billionaire, accustomed to command, was here, sleeves rolled up, hauling composite struts and securing thermal sheeting with his own hands. He was not supervising, he was laboring, his focus absolute, his usual cool demeanor replaced by a raw, almost childlike fascination. When his gloved hand brushed against a frost-encased branch, the grove responded. A shimmering wave of blue light washed over him, and he froze, his eyes going distant. He did not see a grand city, but a vast, mammoth hunting camp under the aurora, a people who measured time in ice cycles and spoke in the creak of glaciers. He felt their end not as a cataclysm, but as a slow, gentle warming, a quiet fading as their world simply melted away from around them. When the vision released him, tears had frozen on his cheeks, glittering in the strange light. The guardians of this place, spirits of swirling snow and shimmering auroral light, observed him from the edges of the grove. Their acceptance was not warm, but it was no longer hostile. They recognized the sincerity of his grief. Later, inside a heated temporary shelter, the hum of generators, a poor substitute for the grove's natural rhythm, Vance broke the silence. His voice was low, stripped of its usual polish. My great-grandfather clear-cut an old-growth forest to build his first mill, he confessed, staring at his hands. The family fortune is built on that single act of taking. I have spent my entire life managing that legacy, trying to balance the scales with philanthropy. But this, he gestured toward the glowing grove, visible through the polymer wall. This is different. This isn't balancing a ledger. This is an apology. Elara watched him, the memory of his tears warring with a lifetime of caution. His remorse felt real, a seismic shift in a powerful man's soul. But power was a fickle master, and redemption was a path easily abandoned when cheaper alternatives appeared. Could a man used to owning things truly learn to simply serve them? Her decision was a risk that tightened her chest, but the sight of the melting ice left no room for hesitation. I will trust you, she said, her voice quiet but firm, but understand this. These forests are not resources. They are relatives. We do not lead them, we listen. We do not take, we are given. Betray that, and the consequences will not be financial. They will be existential. The pact was sealed in that moment, a fragile alliance built on a shared glimpse of sorrow. That fragility was shattered hours later when their perimeter alarms blared. A rival corporation, furious at Vance's sudden environmentalist pivot and his bid to protect the valley, had sent a sabotage team. Under the cover of a raging blizzard, they were moving toward the grove, armed not with weapons, but with thermal lances designed to rapidly melt the ice and accelerants to ensure the grove could never be saved. Vance's redemption and Elara's trust were now secondary. The only thing that mattered was the slow, blue pulse in the ice, and the two very different guardians who now stood together, ready to defend it against the coming storm. The blizzard was not their enemy, but their greatest ally. Elara and Vance stood back to back as the Saboteurs advanced, their thermal lances glowing like malevolent eyes in the swirling white. She did not fight them with force, but with the land's own voice, humming the grove's slow, cold rhythm into the wooden seed. The Frost Guardians responded, their forms of swirling snow merging with the storm. They sculpted the wind, building phantom paths and sheer walls of ice that seemed to shift with every gust. The Saboteurs, disoriented and freezing, found themselves walking in circles, their high-tech gear useless against a maze of living weather. One by one, exhaustion and hypothermia claimed them, until the last of the team simply collapsed into the snow, their weapons dark and inert, waiting for the authorities Vance had covertly summoned. In the quiet aftermath, a single guardian drifted toward Vance. It was a being of intricate ice crystals, and it held out a hand. Resting in its palm was a small, clear shard that pulsed with the same soft, blue light as the grove. This was no mighty heartseed, but a token, a key. It granted him not control, but a listener's ear, a limited ability to sense the general well-being of a memory forest, and to understand its basic needs. The acceptance was quiet, but for Vance, it was more validating than any business deal he had ever closed. Integrating him into the network of keepers, however, was a storm of a different kind. Anya's skepticism was a wall of ice itself. His family's fortune was built on cleared forests. She argued over their secure channel, her voice tight with old anger. Can a legacy of axes truly become a shield for the trees? Elara understood the fear, but she had seen the frozen tears on his face. She advocated fiercely, not for blind trust, but for strategic use of his unique position. She proposed they give him a leadership role in fundraising and global diplomacy, leveraging his immense influence to lobby for international treaties that would recognize and protect sacred natural sites. His redemption would be measured not in words, but in legal, binding protections. The move was a calculated gamble that immediately changed their standing in the world. Overnight, the keepers of the route were no longer a fringe group of environmental activists. They were a force to be reckoned with, backed by one of the planet's most powerful men. Collaboration offers poured in from indigenous coalitions and sympathetic governments, while covert threats began to arrive from extraction conglomerates who saw their profit margins threatened by a new, potent form of conservation. The stakes were no longer about saving a single grove, but about reshaping humanity's relationship with the entire living history of the Earth. This new visibility culminated in a formal invitation, embossed on heavy, official paper. Elara was asked to speak at the Global Accord Summit, a gathering of world leaders convened to discuss the future of planetary conservation. She would be addressing presidents and prime ministers, putting her message and the silent truth of the Heartwoods on the world stage for the very first time. The air inside the summit hall was thick with the scent of polished wood and ambition. Elara stood at the podium, a lone figure before a sea of delegates whose names were etched on placards of power. She did not speak of guardians or stolen seeds. Instead, she told a story of a library, one whose shelves were made of roots and whose books were written in sunlight and soil. She described how the fall of one great civilization was not an isolated event, but a tremor that echoed through the interconnected web of life, leaving scars that nature itself had worked for centuries to heal. Her plea was for a new kind of preservation, one that honored not just the land, but the invisible stories woven into it, the cultural heritage that is as vital to an ecosystem as clean water or clean air. Her words, a careful tapestry of allegory and ecological truth, struck a chord. By the end of the week, 3 nations had committed to establishing new, internationally recognized protected zones, vast swaths of land where the quiet work of memory could continue undisturbed. But success is a bright light that casts long shadows. The extraction industries, seeing their future profits threatened, retaliated with a coordinated smear campaign. Op-eds in major publications questioned Elara's sanity, labeling her a delusional mystic whose radical ideas were a danger to economic progress. They dug up her past, highlighting the academic fraud charges Corbin had fabricated, painting a picture of an unreliable fanatic. The pressure mounted from an unexpected quarter. Her own new allies, well-meaning environmental ministers, convinced by her passion, quietly took her aside. A single demonstration, they urged, just a small, controlled glimpse of the power she alluded to, would silence the critics and secure a dozen more treaties. The evergreen seed felt like a live coal in her pocket, its warm pulse a constant temptation. It would be so easy to open her hand and let its light fill the room, to offer the undeniable proof they craved. The temptation was a physical ache, but the memory of Lyra's dissolving form was a stronger force. To break her vow now would be to betray every Heartwood that had trusted her. Instead, she doubled down on the conventional. At her next press conference, she presented reams of data, showing how the protected groves acted as biodiversity hotspots, their complex root networks filtering toxins from water and stabilizing soil against erosion. She shared the oral histories of indigenous elders, their ancient stories of the land, aligning perfectly with the ecological data, proving that some truths do not need magic to be valid. Her argument, fortified by science and tradition, was more resilient than any spectacle could have been. Frustrated, her enemies shifted tactics. On the final night of the summit, during a crowded gala, a woman in a staff uniform bumped into Elara, her hand darting into Elara's jacket with a pickpocket's grace. But Elara, her senses honed by the whispering woods, felt the shift in the air a moment before the touch. She caught the woman's wrist, and for a split second, their eyes met, the agent's gaze cold and professional. Before a struggle could erupt, 2 of Vance's discreet security personnel materialized, flanking the woman and escorting her smoothly from the ballroom. The entire exchange was over in a breath, unnoticed by the chattering crowd. It was a stark reminder that the war for the past was not fought only with words, but in the shadows of grand halls. As the summit disbanded and delegates flowed toward waiting cars, a figure detached itself from the crowd. The woman was the environmental minister for a small, low-lying island nation, her face etched with a weariness that went beyond the long negotiations. She took Elara's hand, not in a formal handshake, but in a desperate clasp. "Our shores are being eaten by the rising sea," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But our elders speak of a forest in the high valleys, one that does not rustle with wind, but sings with the voices of the drowned." They say it remembers the land that was taken from us. We are running out of time. She pressed a small, woven grass token into Elara's palm before melting back into the crowd, leaving behind the weight of a new, sinking world and the haunting song of a people lost to the waves. The salt-laced wind on the island did not whisper, it sang. Elara stood on a black sand beach, watching waves crash against a forest where trees grew not just in soil, but in the living coral of the reef itself. Their roots were braided with sea fans, and their leaves held the shimmer of sea water. The guardians here were not solid forms, but tidal spirits, their presence a rhythmic push and pull against her senses, their voices a chorus of crashing surf and retreating foam. They showed her a civilization of master navigators who had not fought the ocean, but had learned its language, building their homes in harmony with the tides. Their end was not a sudden cataclysm, but a slow, relentless drowning, a song gradually swallowed by the rising sea. Yet this living library was now under a new assault. The very water that preserved it was turning toxic. Ocean acidification was slowly dissolving the coral roots, and microscopic plastic particles were weaving themselves into the tree's bark, creating static that frayed the edges of ancient memories. A child's laughter from 1,000 years ago would cut out mid-peal. A sailor's star chart would blur into indecipherable smudges. The island's human community was a reflection of this conflict. The elders, who still heard the old songs in their dreams, stood as protectors, but many younger islanders, facing poverty and limited futures, were listening to the promises of a waste disposal conglomerate that offered immense wealth in exchange for turning their sacred coastline into a landfill. The choice felt impossible, a battle between preserving a soul and feeding a body. Elara knew she could not fight this with arguments alone. She had to make the past feel immediate, to show the cost of losing it. She joined the elders in organizing daily beach cleanups and coral reef restoration, but her true work happened in the evenings. Gathered around a fire, she would take out the evergreen seed. As its warm light pulsed in her hands, she did not speak. Instead, she channeled the tidal spirit's memories, letting the islanders see visions of their own ancestors gliding through crystal clear water on ships of woven reed, communicating with whales and reading the stars not as distant points of light, but as a map etched into the fabric of the sky. They felt the profound peace of that lost harmony, a connection so deep it made the waste company's money feel like ashes in the mouth. The island's youth were the first to understand. They became the vanguard of the conservation effort, their energy and hope a new kind of tide, rising to defend their heritage. Then the typhoon hit. It was a fury of wind and water that tore at the coral-rooted trees, snapping limbs and scouring the beach. In the storm's aftermath, as the community surveyed the damage, a massive ancient tree had been uprooted, its fall revealing a previously hidden chamber carved into the volcanic rock beneath. The waste company's agents, who had been waiting on a supply ship offshore, saw their opportunity. This was no longer about a dump site, it was about treasure. They landed immediately, intent on looting the chamber before the islanders could secure it. A frantic race began, not just against the company, but against the next high tide, which threatened to flood the exposed cavern. Elara and the islanders worked in a human chain, bailing seawater with buckets, while others stood guard, forming a living barricade against the corporate mercenaries. Inside the chamber, the air was cool and still, smelling of salt and ancient stone. They expected chests of gold or glittering jewels. Instead, illuminated by a shaft of sunlight piercing through the damaged roof, they found a single, large tablet of obsidian. Carved into its glossy surface was not a map to riches, but a prophecy. It spoke of a time when the great forests of memory would falter, their songs growing faint. It warned of a great unraveling, a severing of the world from its own history, that would begin if the Heartwoods did not learn to sing in harmony, to unite their voices against the coming silence. The real treasure was a warning, and the storm had been the key that unlocked it. The obsidian tablet did not glow or hum. Its power lay in the stark, silent lines of a prophecy, carved in the shared script of multiple lost civilizations. Elara traced the unfamiliar glyphs with a trembling finger, her mind reeling as the Tidal Guardians translated its dire warning into a flood of understanding. The Heartwoods were not isolated libraries. They were vital nodes in a single, planetary network, a living tapestry of memory that stabilized the world's ecological and cultural balance. The prophecy spoke of a great unraveling, a severing of the world from its own history that would begin if too many of these nodes were silenced. The loss would not be a quiet forgetting, but a violent collapse, a cascade of failed ecosystems and cultural amnesia on a global scale. Her mission was no longer about preservation. It was about preventing the end of the world as they knew it. The weight of that knowledge was a physical pressure on her chest, a responsibility so immense it threatened to crush her. Back within the secure channels of her network, the debate was immediate and fierce. Anya argued for absolute secrecy, fearing that public knowledge of such a powerful network would be a beacon for every extractor on the planet. Kalon, however, believed the warning was too big to keep, that they needed to shout it from the rooftops to mobilize a global defense. Elara listened to the fear in their voices, the same fear that coiled in her own gut. Panic would not save the Heartwoods, it would doom them, turning them into prizes in a frantic, destructive scramble. She made the decision alone, the weight of leadership, a cold stone in her stomach. They would share the prophecy, but only with a hand-picked few, trusted world leaders and conservation groups who had already proven their dedication. And they would frame it not as magic, but as a radical scientific theory, a new understanding of how biodiversity and cultural memory are intrinsically linked, and how their loss could trigger irreversible systemic failure. It was a dangerous gamble, watering down the truth to make it palatable, but it was the only way to maintain their hard-won credibility. The waste company, however, had no interest in scientific theories. Their agents had seen the chamber and the tablet, and their greed had transformed into a voracious hunger for the power it represented. They hired a team of ruthless mercenaries, and within hours, the quiet island was a battlefield. Elara and the elders found themselves cornered at the cavern entrance, the precious tablet at their backs and armed men advancing. There was no time for diplomacy or deception. Just as the lead mercenary raised his weapon, the ground itself answered the threat. The Tidal Guardians, their patience exhausted, directed the land itself. With a low, grinding roar, the cliff face above the chamber shifted, triggering a controlled landslide of rock and soil that sealed the entrance completely, burying the prophecy in a tomb of solid earth. In the chaotic seconds before the collapse, Elara had pressed a sheet of paper against the tablet, creating a frantic, smudged rubbing of the ancient glyphs. As the dust settled and the mercenaries stared in stunned disbelief at the newly formed wall of earth, she slipped away into the jungle, the fragile paper tucked safely against her chest. The original warning was safe, but its message was now hers alone to decipher, a coded countdown to a catastrophe she had to stop. The smudged rubbing of the prophecy lay spread across the table, a ghostly map of a coming storm. Elara's network became a single, focused mind, a global think tank, working in secure rooms and remote cabins. Linguists compared the glyphs to fragments of a dozen dead languages, while historians cross-referenced them with creation myths from cultures that had never met. Slowly, painstakingly, the true message emerged. The tablet did not just warn of an unraveling, it offered a solution, a desperate contingency plan left by the ancients themselves. It spoke of a conclave of roots, a gathering of all the world's memory forest guardians that had not been attempted in thousands of years. This conclave was the only way to synchronize their songs, to weave the fraying threads of the planetary network back into a cohesive, resilient whole. But initiating such a gathering required a catalyst, a single consciousness that had earned the trust of multiple Heartwoods to act as a living bridge. The silence in the room was heavier than any stone when they all realized the same terrible truth. Elara was the only one. She had held the Heartseed. She had communed with the tidal spirits. She had earned a token from the ice. She was the obvious, the only choice. The cost of this role, however, was a price that made her blood run cold. The ritual to become the bridge was not a simple ceremony. It was a deep, permanent merging. Her consciousness would be woven directly into the network, a single thread in a vast tapestry. She would gain an unparalleled connection to the world's living memory, but she risked losing her own identity, her singular self dissolving forever into the chorus of ancient voices. Her personal history, her loves, her fears, the very essence of Elara could be washed away in that river of shared experience. The choice was a chasm opening at her feet. To refuse was to condemn the network to a slow, certain death, and with it, the stability of the world. To accept was a form of suicide, a willing surrender of everything she was. She walked alone for hours, the weight of the prophecy and the trusting pulse of the wooden seed a constant, warring pressure in her chest. She thought of Lyra's sacrifice, of the quiet trust in the Ice Guardian's crystalline gaze, of the Island Elder's desperate clasp. Her own story, she realized, was already inextricably linked to theirs. Her identity was no longer just her own. It was a record of every forest that had trusted her. To preserve them was to preserve the most meaningful parts of herself. With a calm that felt both terrifying and right, she gave her answer. She would be the bridge. The ritual's location was specified in the oldest layers of the text, a place of pure, concentrated memory where the first threads of the network had been woven. It was the Nexus, deep within the Whispering Woods. As her team began their covert preparations, a chill warning slithered through their secure channels. The extraction conglomerates, their spies having intercepted fragments of their communications, now understood the true prize. They did not want to destroy the network. They wanted to hijack it, to seize control of the Conclave's power, and bend the accumulated knowledge of vanished civilizations to their will. Their forces were already mobilizing, converging on the one place Elara had to go. The journey back to the Whispering Woods was a silent, grim pilgrimage. The ancient trees seemed to watch their approach, their branches heavy with a knowing tension. The air hummed with a rising frequency, as if the forest itself was tuning for a performance that would either save the world or end its oldest song. Elara stepped across the familiar threshold, the wooden seed in her hand, beating in time with her own heart, ready for a ceremony that would demand everything. The air in the Nexus thickened into liquid gold, and Elara knelt at its center, the wooden seed pulsing in her palm like a second heart. Around her, the Guardians had gathered in their full, terrifying majesty. The weeping Willow from her first forest stood beside a being of swirling desert light and a shimmering tidal spirit, their forms a silent, unified council. An elder guardian, its bark like ancient silver, offered her a simple wooden bowl filled with a brew made from leaves collected from every heartwood. It smelled of deep earth, icy wind, and salt spray. She drank, and the world fell away. Her mind did not just expand, it shattered its own boundaries, touching a dozen different consciousnesses at once. She was a child laughing in a Sunken City's plaza, a navigator reading the stars from a reed boat, a hunter feeling the immense cold of the Ice Age. The sheer weight of collective joy was a sunrise in her soul, and the ocean of shared sorrow was a tide that threatened to drown her. Yet her own singular presence, the thread of Elara, began to stitch the fraying network back together. The chaotic symphony of memories began to harmonize, their unified song strengthening the very roots of the world. Then the Nexus shuddered. The extractors had breached the final barrier, their crude, silver tools hacking at the luminous roots. Kale stood at their forefront, his face a mask of avarice, his eyes fixed not on Elara, but on the raw power swirling around her. She was trapped, her body a vulnerable anchor in the physical world, while her consciousness battled to hold the delicate unity of the spiritual one. She was a bridge under assault from both ends. In that expanded state, she saw the fear in the extractors' hearts, their hollow hunger for meaning. She did not fight them with force, but offered a vision, pouring the forest's wisdom directly into their minds. She showed them the quiet dignity of the Ice Age hunters, the profound peace of the desert weavers. She offered them a place not as conquerors, but as partners in this vast, living history. A few of his crew faltered, their weapons lowering as tears welled in their eyes, overwhelmed by the gift they had been prepared to steal. But Kale roared in defiance, shattering the connection. "You cannot buy me with ghosts," he snarled, and he raised a cruel, obsidian dagger she recognized, a stolen artifact from the island chamber, designed to sever magic. He plunged it not into her, but into the Nexus itself. A scream of tearing reality echoed through the chamber, and a jagged crack of blackness split the golden air. The unified song of the forests faltered, and the backlash of that severance lanced through Elara's spirit, becoming a physical agony that arched her back and stole her breath. The network began to fray at its edges, memories dissolving into screaming static. They had only minutes before the unraveling became irreversible. In that moment of absolute crisis, Alistair Vance moved. He was no warrior, but he was a man who had finally found something worth more than his fortune. He threw himself at Kale, not with a weapon, but with his own body, tackling the man and sending the obsidian dagger skittering across the glowing floor. It was a desperate, clumsy act, but it created the distraction Elara needed, drawing on every cherished memory she had absorbed. The mother's lullaby, the child's whisper, the warmth of the wooden seed, the frozen tear on a billionaire's cheek. She gathered them all into a single, focused point of will. She did not resist the pain. She embraced it, using its sharp clarity to make one final, decisive push, weaving her own life story into the grand tapestry, completing the ritual with a surge of blinding, harmonious light. The blinding light did not fade, it settled. It became a permanent dawn within the Nexus, a soft, breathing luminescence that pulsed in time with Elara's own heartbeat. The jagged crack in reality sealed itself, and the screaming static of the unraveling resolved into a single, harmonious chord that resonated through every root and vein of the global network. The memory forests, from the desert sands to the city park, shuddered with a profound, healing warmth. Withering leaves flushed green, brittle bark softened, and the faint, fading guardians solidified, their forms now radiant with renewed strength. Kale and the remaining extractors did not flee. They simply stood, their weapons falling from slack hands as the sustained radiance washed over them. It was not an aggressive force, but a gentle, inexorable tide of forgetting. The light did not harm them. It simply lifted the knowledge of the forests from their minds, erasing the maps, the greed, the obsession, leaving behind only a vague, peaceful confusion. They would wander out of the woods as blank as newborns, their dangerous hunger replaced by a quiet awe for the trees they could no longer name. Elara felt the transformation in her own body, a final, irrevocable shift. Her legs fused with the living stone of the Nexus, her form becoming one with the central root. She was no longer a visitor in this sacred space. She was its anchor, the living heart of the planetary network. Her physical form was rooted for eternity, but her consciousness was now limitless, free to travel along the whispering roots to any heartwood in the world. She could feel the tidal spirits dancing in the island's surf and hear the Ice Age winds howl across the glacier simultaneously. She was everywhere and nowhere, a guardian woven into the fabric of memory itself. The cost of this victory was her humanity. She could never walk in the sun again, never feel the rain on her own skin, never share a meal with her comrades. The loneliness of that eternal vigil was a deep, cold current beneath the warm river of shared memories. Yet as she felt the profound relief of the forests, the gentle thrum of their restored songs, she knew this was not a loss, but the ultimate fulfillment of her promise. She had become the scribe, the warden, and the heart, all in one. With a thought that rippled through the network, she summoned Alistair, Vance, and the core members of her network to the grove's edge. They saw her there, enmeshed in light and wood, her eyes holding the patience of ancient stone and the brilliance of 1,000 stars. She could not speak with a human voice, but her words formed directly in their minds, clear and calm. "You are my hands in the world of footsteps," she imparted. "I will guide you, but you must act." Vance, his own transformation now complete, knelt without hesitation, accepting the charge. With her whispered wisdom flowing through them, they established the Root Song Foundation, a global institution dedicated to the preservation of these vital ecosystems. Their work, now backed by Vance's resources and guided by Elara's unseen hand, moved with unprecedented purpose, creating protected corridors and funding research that subtly integrated the forest's ancient knowledge into modern solutions. From her rooted throne, Elara watches this new world blossom. She feels a composer in Norway, inspired by a dream of crystalline structures, design a building that cools itself. She senses a biologist in the Amazon, suddenly understanding a symbiotic relationship thanks to a forgotten lullaby humming in her mind. The forest's memories are no longer locked away. They are a gentle, guiding wind, inspiring a renewed respect for the deep, interconnected history of the living world. Her vigil is eternal, and future threats will always gather in the shadows, but she is no longer alone. She is the network, and the network is the world, a silent, singing testament to all that was, and all that must be remembered. A profound peace had settled in the Nexus, a silence woven from countless synchronized heartbeats. Elara, now a being of woven root and solidified light, felt the restored network breathing with her, a planetary rhythm of memory and life. It was in this perfect stillness that a final, desperate threat emerged. One of Kale's extractors, a man named Reese, had been shielded from the general, forgetting by the very obsidian dagger he clutched. Consumed by a final, bitter spite, he did not lunge for Elara. Instead, he raised the dark blade high, aiming its point at the luminous pool of memories itself, intending to inject a single, concentrated dose of pure oblivion into the world's heart. Elara did not summon roots to bind him. She did not call upon the guardians. To fight violence with violence would only introduce a new poison into the system. Instead, she opened herself completely. As the dagger began its descent, she reached out with her consciousness and caught Reese not with force, but with feeling. She enveloped him in a vision, but not of sorrow or loss. She showed him the love. She poured into him the simple, profound joy of a potter shaping clay under a sun his people had worshipped. She let him feel the fierce, protective pride of a navigator, guiding her family to a new shore. She filled him with the quiet contentment of a scholar, tracing the growth of a sapling he had planted, a tree that would outlive his grandchildren. It was the collective, unspoken love of 1,000 civilizations for their own unique worlds, the reason they had fought so hard to be remembered. The dagger clattered to the ground, its malicious intent shattered. Riss' arm fell to his side, his body trembling not with rage, but with a seismic, emotional overload. The corrosive malice that had driven him was washed away in that tidal wave of shared affection, leaving behind a raw, aching emptiness that was quickly filled with a profound, shattering empathy. He saw himself not as a conqueror, but as a vandal about to desecrate the most beautiful library ever built. A sob racked his frame as he fully understood the weight of what he had nearly destroyed. As he wept there on the luminous floor, the Nexus responded to his transformed heart. Tendrils of soft, gold-flecked light emerged from the ground, not to punish, but to weave. They coiled gently around his hands, the hands that had held a weapon, and began to transform them. His form shimmered, solidifying into a new kind of guardian, one born not from ancient sacrifice, but from modern redemption. His purpose would be unique, to stand as a sentinel against those who, like his former self, believed that power was the only thing worth taking from the past. The true defense of memory was not a wall, but a bridge. By offering understanding instead of opposition, Elara had not neutralized a threat. She had strengthened the network with a new kind of wisdom. proving that the only force powerful enough to preserve a world is the courage to share its heart. Years bled into decades, and the quiet hum of the restored network became the planet's steady, underlying pulse. The whispering woods grew denser, its borders softening as the vibrant green of its protection spread into the surrounding lands. Across the world, the influence of the memory forests began to seep, almost imperceptibly, into the very fabric of global culture. Architects designed buildings inspired by the living spires of the Sunken City, their curves and lattices promoting natural light and air in ways that felt both innovative and deeply ancient. Musicians composed symphonies with harmonies that subconsciously echoed the tidal spirit's songs, leaving listeners with a profound, unnameable sense of peace. This was not a takeover, but a gentle remembering, a course correction for a world that had strayed too far from its roots. Though her body remained a permanent part of the Nexus, Elara's consciousness was a boundless traveler. She felt no imprisonment in her rooted form, only an infinite connection. Her joy was not a personal, human feeling, but a vast, resonating frequency. It was the sensation of a new sapling taking root in the protected city park, its tender leaves absorbing the memories of the concrete world around it. It was the ripple of understanding in a young student who, after reading the allegorical song of the root keepers, suddenly looked at the old oak in her backyard with a new, reverent wonder. She experienced the growth of the forests not as an observer, but as the very soil and sunlight that nurtured them. Her network, the keepers of the root, now thrived under Vance's leadership, and they taught her story not as a history, but as a living legend. It became a parable of sacrifice and unity, a reminder that the greatest strength lies not in possession, but in partnership. In the central courtyard of the Rootsong Foundation headquarters, the small, wooden seed Elara had entrusted to Vance was no longer a dormant object. Planted in soil gathered from every continent, it had sprouted into a magnificent, unique tree. Its bark held the silver sheen of the city grove, its leaves whispered with the dry wisdom of the desert, and its deep roots seemed to pulse with a cool, blue light, as if drawing water from the Arctic ice. It was a living bridge, a testament to the pact between the human world and the memory forests. People from all walks of life would come to sit beneath its branches, and though they heard no voices, they left feeling calmer, more grounded, as if they had briefly touched a truth too deep for words. Elara's legacy was not a statue or a named holiday. It was this pervasive, quiet understanding that began to take hold in the human heart. The story of the woman who became the forest taught a final, crucial lesson. Memory is not an artifact to be locked away, nor a resource to be consumed. It is a living, breathing entity. When we cherish it, when we listen to the stories held in the land and the trees, we do more than honor the past. We root ourselves in a shared, enduring legacy, becoming part of a story that began long before us and will continue long after, a story written not in stone, but in the very soul of the world.